Okay, we're going to have a look at the second part, what is the mechanism of arrhythmias. You may see that I have left all the draft from the previous part because it will help us a lot. Okay, there are three types of mechanism of arrhythmias. The first one is the automatism, the second one is the trigger activity, and the third one is the re-entry. Okay, we are going to see three of them. The first one is there is the enhanced automaticity. We have already said that there are some cells that have the automatism property, the pacemaker cells. So we can have a normal automaticity in case these cells are the ones that have the increased automaticity. So they are the ones that fire at a higher pace. That means in which situation we could have that. For example, we can have in situation with a person doing exercise. As we have seen with the exercise, for example, the sympathetic nervous system will release noradrenaline, and the noradrenaline will open the calcium and the sodium channels. It will increase the slope, we will reach the threshold before, and we have higher heart rate. We also will have this in situations, for example, with fever, because of the same phenomenon. We can also have in persons with inappropriate sinus tachycardia, and we can also have this in situation, for example, of hypoxia. Situation of hypoxia or hypokalemia. For example, with hypoxia, we don't have enough ATP and less of potassium will go inside the cell. In situations of hypoxia, we have less potassium outside to bring inside. Both of these situations will bring the slope up, and we are going to reach the threshold before, and we are going to increase the heart rate by a normal automaticity. Then we are going to have what is called the abnormal automaticity. The abnormal automaticity means that a cell that is not usually prepared to perform the pacemaker, the automatism property, usually myocardial cells that can be either in the atriums or in the ventricle, they start firing, so they start having automatism. Why does it happen? Usually because there is something that brings the voltage of the cell less negative. Usually we said that we usually start, the myocardial cells start at -85. Let's say that they go to -55, like if we have here. If we are in -55, the channels of sodium are already closed. The fast sodium channel. So, but we have that at this point there are some slow sodium channels that might open, as well as some slow calcium channels, like the one that we have here. And we can increase in the graph up to this point. We can reach the -45, and then more rapid calcium channels will open, and then we will start the phase 0. So that is why a myocardial cell can become and can have an action potential pretty similar to the one that we have in the pacemaker cells. Which situation does it happen? Well, like we said, it can both happen in the atrium, both can happen in the ventricles. But why? We can have a situation, for example, of hyperkalemia. Situations of hyperkalemia, for example, there is a lot of potassium outside the cell, there is less of a gradient in between them, and the cell is less negative. Situations of low pH, and also situations of ischemia. situations of ischemia, the membrane starts disrupting, a lot of calcium and sodium can enter in the cell, and the cell become less negative. So this is a mechanism of enhanced automaticity. What is the second one? The second one is the trigger activity. What is a trigger activity? We have said that when an action potential starts, there is a mechanism of defense that the cell has, that is the refractory period, that avoids for any other impulse to start a new depolarization. But something happens that it may fail, and we can have what is called after depolarizations. After depolarization. Those after depolarization can happen at any time, either in phase 2, phase 3 or phase 4, and a new action potential can begin before time. So there are two types of after depolarization that we can have. One is the delayed after depolarization. It happens when this depolarization starts in phase 4, like the one we have here, phase 4. Phase 4. If the stimulus is big enough and it reaches the threshold, a new action potential can begin. Okay? Why does it happen? Usually because of the entrance of calcium. And how can calcium enter inside the cell during this phase 4? Usually there are some situations, like for example in ischemia. In ischemia we have seen that the membrane by getting disrupted, also the channels, and a lot of calcium can enter in the cell. Also, situation where we have a lot of catecholamines. As we have seen before, the catecholamines in the pacemaker cells usually increase the entrance of calcium and sodium and increase the slope, increasing the firing rate. But also the catecholamines might increase the entrance of calcium in this phase and also in other phases of the myocardial cells. So if they increase the entrance of calcium during phase 4, then it can trigger a delayed after depolarization. Then we have another one that is called the CPVT, catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. Is a syndrome that we will see later when we see the other syndromes. But usually what happens is that we have a leak of calcium of this sarcoplasmic reticulum, the renin receptor, and put a lot of calcium out during this phase 4. And finally, another is dioxin. Dioxin, as you may know, is usually blocks this ATP pump. And when it blocks the ATP pump, it means that a lot of sodium will accumulate here, will be stored inside the cell. And because there is a lot of sodium inside, it will be exchanged with calcium by this exchanger. So in the end, a lot of calcium will enter here during phase 4. So those delayed after depolarizations have some characteristics, and the first one is that they are usually increased with the heart rate. So So, and they also increase with the action potential. So every situation that increase the heart rate or increase the action potential, and when I mean increase the action potential is increasing this y, this interval of the action potential, that is increasing the QT, makes that these delayed after deparization are more likely to happen. So every time that we have any of those phenomena, we will try to give drugs that do not increase heart rate and do not increase the QT interval. Okay, so let's go for the next one. We can also have what is called the early after depolarization. Early after depolarization usually happen in phase 2 or phase 3. They may happen because a problem with the entrance of calcium or the less of outwards of potassium. And we can find this situation, and this situation what happens is that we can have depolarization if it is in phase 2, because a lot of entrance of calcium can happen here, and we can have depolarization here, or in phase 3 we can have depolarization here, we can have the start of another action potential before time. We can have this situation in some syndromes that we are going to see later, that is the Brugada syndrome and also the long QT syndrome. In those two situations, we can have early after depolarization. In the early after depolarization, usually happens that they increase when we have low heart rate, the opposite of the delay, low heart rate, and also like in the previous one with long action potential. So in this situation we are not going to try to give drugs that slow the heart rate, because if we have those early after depolarization, the low heart rate can increase the frequency of those phenomena, and we are going to try to give drugs that do not increase the QT interval, like in the delay after depolarization. What is the problem with those phenomena of after depolarization? Like if, for example, we have here, let's say that we have an early after depolarization here. If we have another action potential happening here, we have a gradient between one cell and another's. One cells are depolarizing like this and other are depolarizing like this. It makes that we have an unhomogeneous depolarization, and so it is called a dispersion of the repolarization, and it can lead to the production of ventricular tachycardias, usually polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, like the Tosua de Poix that we will see later. Also, sometimes this phenomenon can lead to another types of arrhythmias. And finally, we are going to have the third phenomenon, the third mechanism of arrhythmia, that is the re-entry. Re-entry, okay. Basically, we could say that re-entry is a circuit. So every time that we got a circuit in the conduction system of the heart, we got a re-entry. And we got a re-entry that can be of two types. The first type is a structural re-entry. Structural re-entry. So there is something in the structure of the heart that leads to the production of this re-entry. To have a structural re-entry, we need two things. First of all, we need an obstacle, because if we have an obstacle, when the electrical impulse comes and reaches the obstacle, it has to turn into two ways, turn around the obstacle. Okay, but if we only have this obstacle, when we have the electrical impulse going here, it will reach in here but cannot go up, because those cells are depolarizing at the same time and they are going to be in the refractory period. So we cannot only have a circuit just because of having this obstacle. We need another property. Another property would be that one of the two pathways need to have either an unidirectional block, and that means that the electricity can go one way but not in the other. So let's say that, for example, in this pathway we have an unidirectional block that leads the electricity to go this way up but not this way down. So when the electricity comes from here, it will arrive to this block, it will block, but we will turn the other way, and it can go up, and when the impulse comes here, those cells, they are no longer in the refractory period, so it can mean that we can have a cycle, this re-entry that we need. Another situation would be, like if, for example, we have here this obstacle, one of the pathways is slower than the other. Let's say that we have here a rapid pathway and here a slower one. We have this slower one, the electricity will pass very rapidly through here, and when this slow one reaches this point, those cells are ready to initiate a new depolarization, and then we can have the circuit. This circuit, this kind of structural circuit, we can find in a lot of situations of the heart. We can say, for example, that we can find it in what is called the accessory pathways. The accessory pathways are anomalous tracts that joins the atrium and the ventricle, for example here, that lead us to have a circle over here. We can also have the atrioventricular reentral nodal tachycardia. Atrioventricular reentral nodal tachycardia. Usually in the AV node, some people have two pathways in the AV node. One is rapid and the other one is very slow. So here we could possibly also have, this other way, also a re-entry. And every time we have a scar, for example, let's say a myocardial infarction here in the left ventricle, or for example in dysplasia in the right ventricle, we can also have this structural re-entry, because we can say, for example, that we have this scar. Sometimes we can have scars in the heart that, for example, allow to pass the electricity through this way, and let's say that there is another scar over here, and allow to pass slowly through this other way. So we have another circuit here. Those are what it's called structural re-entries, because we have something structural going bad in the heart. Sometimes we have what is called the functional re-entries. Functional reentries happens when there is nothing wrong with the muscle of the heart, with the conduction of the heart, but usually there is something wrong with the channels of the heart. We have already seen some of those in here. So if we have any of those phenomena, rather delayed after depolarization or early after depolarization, that makes this dispersion of the repolarization happen in the heart, it will mean that some places in the heart, for example, are depolarizing with some refractory period, and others may depolarize with other refractory period. So there is a gradient, and a functional reentry may happen between them. It is more complex than a circle. Usually it's what they call helix. They have helix 3D forms like rotors, and they usually lead while in the structural reentries. For example, we have a ventricular tachycardia. It will be monomorphic ventricular tachycardia, all the complexes will be the same. If we have a functional tachycardia, we have what is called polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, because each complex will be different, because it's not a circuit, it's a more complex form. And that's all with the mechanism of the arrhythmias.